Hello, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I am very pleased to have this program where we will talk about a few topics that are really interesting and also very important. One is related to the relationship between faith and science, and also we will talk about uh, the book of Genesis, because that book, especially in the modernist time, was under fire. So we will see if, following a Catholic vision of the world, we can still believe that book is what it pretends to be. And to do this, I am pleased to talk with Father Paul Robinson. Father Paul Robinson, a priest from United States, from Denver. He is not only a priest, but he is also a scientist because he is a trained engineer. And he is the author of a very relevant book for the topic we are discussing that is called The Realist Guide to Religion and Science. So thank you, Father Robinson, for your participation to our broadcast.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Aurelio. I appreciate the
You're
opportunity.
welcome. So I want to ask you why you call your book The Realist Guide to Religion and Science. Why the realist?
Because of the fact that realism is a certain philosophical position that has historically been taken by Catholic philosophers, especially the scholastics of the Middle Ages. So realism is basically a stance that says that our mind, it believes that both our mind and our senses connect us with reality. And I mean, that may seem kind of basic and fundamental, like everybody has to work on those assumptions, and that's very true. But the fact is that there have been many philosophers throughout the history of philosophical thought who have wanted to doubt either the veracity of our sense data or the ability of our concepts that are in our mind to actually mirror reality. So the realist position in philosophy, it's a certain epistemology, if you will, it's a certain theory about human knowing, and it holds that both our senses and our concepts, the concepts that we form in our minds, do connect us with reality. And my book effectively says that unless you have this position on the ability of the human mind and the human senses to know reality, then you're going to fall into big problems in trying to make a harmonization between religion and science. Unless you have this disposition to think that the human, as God has created him, has the ability to connect with reality through his senses and also through his concepts, then you're going to have a conflict. There's going to be a conflict between science and religion. And so the Catholic faith really leads the way in this regard because it manages to save reason or believe in the abilities of reason and believe also in faith, whereas a lot of other religions, in a certain sense, all religions to some degree, somehow divorce religion and reason. They make this opposition. There's like some of this opposition between religion and reason.
Thank you. So you say that the Catholic faith reconcile religion and reason. So that is a reasonable faith. We may say like this.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And I want to ask you, you have a training in engineering. So how this training has interacted with your faith? Because for many that go into science, it seems that science prevent them to be believers. No, we know of many statistics that say that a lot of scientists, they, because they are scientists, they don't believe in anything. I mean, not just Catholic, but any kind of faith. So,
Right.
how your approach was different?
So in my training, I got into the field of computer science engineering, but at the time, because I'm getting old now, but this was back in the '90s. I was at University of Louisville, Kentucky, and the computer science engineering at that time was very heavily oriented towards mathematics, and therefore, I mean, I feel like I got a certain training in the mathematical sciences. Definitely got a lot of mathematics, and I was always science oriented. So after I became an engineer, I entered the seminary. I became a priest. Um, because I had that mathematical training, I was able to read scientific literature on the current developments in science. And I have to admit that when before I entered the seminary, I was a little bit tending towards the Protestant fundamentalist position on science, which believes that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and that God created everything fully formed 6,000 years ago. But what I did was when I was a seminary professor, I was a seminary professor in Australia for 10 years, and I was required to teach the book of Genesis. And I really started to study deeply some scientific questions, especially questions concerning the Big Bang and Darwinian evolution. And I also studied the Catholic position on the interpretation of Genesis, particularly after what we might call the scientific revolution, the scientific developments of the 19th century. And what I discovered is that not only do the scientific discoveries that have been made after, the advent of sort of refined geology and evolutionary biology, and the discoveries of DNA, the discoveries of astronomy with the distance of the light of the stars. Not only do none of these things contradict our faith, but in fact, what I discovered is that they point to the reality of the God that we believe in much more than what we knew in the past. And in fact, it's obviously a belief of all Catholics that no matter what the scientists find out there, it will end up confirming our faith, because what we believe for the supernatural truths that we believe come from God, and the natural world comes from God. And so there's no way for them to conflict. So anything that we find out about the natural world is necessarily going to support what we believe by faith in the supernatural world. And what I discovered is that, yes, the scientific breakthroughs that we have had in the 20th century, in the 19th century, really confirm everything that we've believed for a long time, especially the fact that God created the universe with a beginning in time, that the universe is not eternal, but the universe has a beginning in time.
Um, Thank you, but I want to also know, you were studying these scientific subjects, and you made the choice of faith. But I'm sure a lot of your colleagues, I may say, that study engineer, they go in another direction. They use their scientific training to deny the base for a faith. So how you deal with this kind of situations? You try to let them understand that indeed their position was not so reasonable as maybe they thought, or you thought that probably it was very difficult to get them to come to your side.
Yes. So, to be honest, a lot of the fellow students that I had when I was in the University of Louisville, Kentucky, A lot of them were believers. I didn't come into contact, to be honest, with a lot of atheists. But definitely reading the scientific literature, you see that there's a certain will by some scientists to adopt an atheistic position. And what I try to point out in my book is that the more we discover about the universe, the more irrational atheism becomes. The atheists were always hoping that science would be the means to show that we don't need a God. If you look at the Summa of St. Thomas and his most famous article, "Does God Exist?" There's only two objections against God, and there's really the strongest objections can be made against the existence of God. But one of these objections says, well, we can explain everything around us without having recourse to a God, without needing a God to explain anything. And so, God doesn't exist. By Occam's razor, by this idea that you go with the simplest explanation, we think that God does not exist. We've explained everything by means of the things around us. The world around us explains itself, so we don't need God. But what I point out in my book is that the latest scientific discoveries have made the need for there to be a first cause who is at the origin of all reality more necessary than in the past. So science has not assisted the atheists. The more they discover, the more they realize, or the more their evidence points to a transcendent, immaterial God outside of the material world who has created everything. And if I may, I just give the primary example of that, and that is the Big Bang Theory. And you may know that before the Big Bang Theory was proposed by a Catholic priest, Father Georges Lemaitre, he proposed the Big Bang Theory. He was basically working upon Einstein's general theory of relativity. And he said, Einstein's general theory of relativity predicts that the universe is expanding. And if that's the case, if the universe is expanding and has always been expanding, then if we go back to in time, the universe is contracting back in time until you get finally to the universe starting out with a single point. And that some being had to start the universe off, some being that was outside of space and time had to begin the universe at that moment of the Big Bang, that there was no space and time before then, there was really no matter before then, but somehow, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, space and time began, all the matter of the universe began. So this was the proposal of Father Georges Lemaitre, working on the equations of Einstein, the predictions of Einstein's theory of relativity. I think I said this, the general theory is actually the special theory of relativity. And then there was a rival theory by atheists saying that effectively, no, the universe did not have a beginning. All matter and space and time did not start at one moment in time, but the universe has existed forever. That all the matter that exists right now has always existed. And as such, we don't need some sort of cause of the universe. It's just a brute fact. It's always been there. And that was called the steady state theory. And it was its proponents were people like Herman Bondi and Fred Hoyle, a British astronomer. And so there was this conflict between the two, between the Big Bang theory proposed by a Catholic priest and the steady state theory proposed by atheists. So the atheists wanted the universe to have the properties of God. They wanted the universe to be eternal. They wanted the universe to be absolutely homogeneous, sort of the same, always the same, so that it would somehow explain itself, and we would not need to have recourse to a God to explain it. But as time went on, more and more evidence came for the Big Bang theory, especially the astronomical data that where you look out into the night sky, and as we refined our telescopes and made them better over time, what we discovered is that the universe tells a history about itself. And it does say that we started off with very simple galaxies that developed over time, that the universe has been expanding over time, and especially that there is a certain remnant of that initial bang, a certain radiation that pervades the entire universe, no matter where you are, that's at a certain temperature, and which we would expect to be there if the universe started with this burst of energy, this incredible burst of energy. And so today, all the scientists have effectively adopted the Big Bang Theory. They've accepted the fact that the evidence is overwhelming for it. And as such, they have to accept that the universe had a beginning in time, that space and time itself started at a certain moment 13.7 billion years ago, and that therefore there has to be some sort of causal explanation for that. For them to try to find some causal explanation other than God is very, very difficult, and really it makes them look irrational when they try to do that. How do you explain the universe starting with an incredible burst of energy that's extremely choreographed with fine-tuning of the constants of the physical world such that it will develop in the right way? How can you explain that without there being some incredibly powerful being outside of space and time starting that off? So now the atheists are in a much more difficult position with the evidence we have now to justify explaining the universe without God.
Thank you. You mentioned now. You are mentioning in your answer about the creation. No, the creation story is one of the main point of a conflict when you talk about what the people believe. The believers and the non-believers. So there is this very strong conflict between what they call the evolutionist and the creationist, and also the people that believe that we are the outcome of an evolution loosely following Darwin, and creationists that also in different ways believe that we are the outcome of the creation of God. So what is your position as a priest regarding evolution? For example, you are also a scientist. They say that there are some elements that led us to think that evolution is more than a theory, something more concrete than a simple theory. So what is your position about this?
Well, I think Aurelio, I really need to start out with a very important distinction, and some people confuse this, but we have to distinguish between biological evolution, which is the theory of Darwin, which tries to explain the origin of life forms purely from secondary causes without the intervention of God. So that's Darwinian evolution. And then there's another sort of evolution, which is not really what we typically call evolution. And this is the development of inanimate matter over the history of the universe. What I was just talking about, that God somehow, he configured the universe, the initial constants of the universe, what's called the cosmological constant, or the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, the way that atoms work, and the rate of expansion of the universe. There's so many constants that had to be configured in a special way so that the universe would develop over time, such that initial energy, which is just like plasma, it's just raw energy, that it would develop over time into atoms, into the elements of hydrogen, and helium, the most basic elements, and that gravitational forces and so on would cause the formation of stars, and the stars would form in such a way that some of them would sort of compact upon themselves. The big O stars would compact upon themselves with such incredible pressure that the other elements of the periodic table would be formed, and that initially the universe would develop to such a degree that you would have all of the elements, the inanimate elements, that are necessary as a foundation for life. Elements like nitrogen and iron and oxygen, these are carbon. Carbon obviously is part of all organic matter. So there's a certain evolution, if you want to call it that, at the inanimate level, wherein it's simply a question of elements interacting with one another, forming more complex elements, and the universe forming stars and forming terrestrial planets like our planet, the Earth. And our planet has in itself all of these elements, these raw materials that are necessary for life as we know it. So in my book, I fully embrace this idea that the universe has developed in such a way. And of course, I attribute it to God. That I mean, as I say it's almost irrational to say that this very fine-tuned choreography of the universe to develop over 13.7 billion years to get the planet that we have was not the result of some intelligent mind. It's obvious that it was a result of an intelligent mind. So that's the evolution, if you want to call it, of inanimate matter, of raw elements, the elements of the periodic table. The other question is whether those inanimate elements were choreographed by God such that they turned into life. The evolutionists talk about a primordial soup. You just have the earth at its early stages of its formation, and somehow you have this pond or this water that has primordial elements in it, and maybe it gets struck by lightning. Maybe something happens in such a way that amino acids form, and then somehow the amino acids form into proteins, and somehow the proteins form into DNA, and somehow the DNA constructs molecular machines and all the machinery of the cell, such that you have kind of magically the first form of life coming from just raw elements and just the combination of matter. So that's another theory altogether from what I was just talking about.
Thank you. I want to remind our viewers that we are broadcasting on YouTube, Ritorno a Itaca, in my Twitter account, Aurelio Porfiri, my Facebook fan page, Aurelio Porfiri. If you want to be always updated about all the videos, articles, and programs that I'm doing, go to Telegram and look for Aurelio Porfiri's channel in Telegram, where there are already some hundreds subscribers, and then you can be one of them and be updated first on everything that I am preparing. So saying that, I would like to go back to the question of the creation. So when we speak about the story of creation in Genesis, we speak about Adam and Eve. So of course, many scientists will say, "Oh, they never exist," or they never existed, and it's only a mythological story about creation. And other people would say, no, they exist. But certainly, how you can reconcile Adam and Eve with what you know from your scientific training?
So let me first point out that the teaching of the church that the whole human race derives from a single set of first parents, Adam and Eve, something that's called Monogainism. Monogainism, the idea that everybody that's on the planet right now, planet Earth right now, has the same first parents, that there are not multiple first parents from which we derive, but we all come from Adam and Eve. This idea is called Monogainism, as opposed to Polygainism. Polygainism is the idea that we all derive from different sets of first parents. So Monogainism is a teaching of the Catholic Church that Catholics must believe. This is something we believe on faith. And of course, the atheists, the scientists, they realize that we believe this, and they want to try to debunk this belief. And they try to use various elements of our DNA, something called mitochondrial DNA, which I believe is passed on through the mother. They try to use it to trace back to see if they can discover how many first parents we might have had. And effectively, I would claim that the science currently is at a stalemate, that scientists are not able to show that we came from multiple first parents, and they're not able to show that we ultimately came from a single set of first parents. So various believers have pointed out, especially I think of the scientists of the Discovery Institute here in the United States in Seattle, Washington. So they're real scientists. They're not people who base everything on the Bible. They're trying to do real science, but they claim that science has not proved that we all come from multiple first parents, but that it's possible for there to be something called a bottleneck. And that is when we go back in time, like all the data converges on a single set of first parents from which all of our genetic material derives, that it's not impossible for this to be the truth of the origin of the human race. But I honestly don't know if we will ever have sufficient information based on the fossils that we have. It really relies upon the fossils that we are able to find of human remains. I don't know if that we will ever be able to establish definitively whether monogainism or polygainism is correct based on scientific data alone. But it's definitely not anti-scientific to believe in monogainism. And of course, we as Catholics, we say this is a teaching of the Church, and it's impossible that science would disprove monogainism at some point. It's impossible that something that we've believed from the beginning somehow be proven wrong by science. And so that would undermine our entire faith. So right now it's at a stalemate. There's no definitive evidence for polygainism or monogainism. It's up in the air.
But I also want to continue with this because one other topic of confrontation, we may say, between the evolutionist and the people that believe in what is in the Bible is that there is a huge difference in the timeline of creation. In the according to the scientists, the Earth is billions of years old, and according to the creation story, we should be few thousand years. So how you reconcile these two hugely different positions?
Yes. So and I hope you don't mind me explaining these things in a little bit more detail, because
No, please.
These things are very complicated, and it's just everybody's passionate about it. So it's important that we get back to the principles and understand the deep reasons for our Catholic position. And I on this question, I really think it's important to point out the different approach that we as Catholics have towards the Bible as opposed to Protestants. So we as Catholics, we do not start with the Bible. We start with the revelation that was given by Jesus Christ to the apostles, the deposit of faith that has been faithfully passed down from generation to generation. So the Bible comes after this handing on of the faith to the apostles and to those generations. The Bible comes after. So for us as Catholics, when we go to read the Bible, we already know what we believe. We already know what has been revealed by Jesus Christ. That is the first thing. That is the starting point for us. And the rule that we have when we read the Bible is whatever interpretation that we give to the Bible, it must not come into conflict with what we believe with our Catholic faith. And what this does is it provides us a certain freedom of interpretation. It provides us flexibility for interpretation. And we see this in the fathers of the church. The fathers of the church had different interpretations of Genesis 1. There's basically 3 different interpretations that the fathers came up with. If you look at the Latin fathers, a lot of the Latin fathers think that Genesis teaches that the universe was created instantaneously in one moment, that there was no time, that it wasn't a period of 6 days. Because of the fact that Genesis starts off by saying that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it says that before it talks about the 6 days. So they believe that, well, God instantaneously created the heavens and the earth. And the 6 days merely describe the development of the universe, not the creation ex nihilo of the universe. There were other fathers who believed that the 6-day description, which is called the hexameron, is exactly what happened, that God created the universe in stages. So there were 6 24-hour days in which the universe was created. It was very literal. I think it's the Cappadocian fathers who adopted that position. And then the Alexandrian fathers, like Origen, for instance, they had a very allegorical position. They believed that the 6 days of creation, as described in Genesis, are just an allegory. It's not the real history of the universe. It's just a didactic lesson. It's a means of explaining to us and teach us that God is behind everything that exists. So we as Catholics, we are free to adopt any of those positions as an interpretation of the Bible, because none of them actually conflict with anything that we believe as Catholic. It doesn't conflict with any of the teachings of the church. So, I mean, there's no teaching of the church that relies upon time. It says God had to have created the universe 6,000 years ago, or that he had to create the universe in 6 24-hour days. God could do it however he wanted. We must believe that God is behind everything, that he is the source of all reality, and that's simply it, and that we derive from a single set of first parents. But because of the fact that we know what we believe when we read the Bible, we don't have to read it as saying that the universe was created 6,000 years ago in 6 24-hour days. The Protestants, on the other hand, they do not start with the revelation given to them by Jesus Christ. They just start with the Bible. They believe that the Bible is what God left us to try to figure out his teaching and what we should believe. So they don't know what they believe when they start reading the Bible. And what this means is that what they tend to do is gravitate towards a very literal reading of the Bible, especially the stricter Protestant sects, or a very liberal reading of the Bible. They might say, well, God had to have created the universe 6,000 years ago in 6 24-hour days, and you have to believe that. No matter what science says, you have to believe this. Or they might gravitate towards saying, well, the idea that the universe was created 6,000 years ago has been disproved by science, so we can't trust the Bible, so the Bible has nothing true about it. They have these two extremes. Whereas we as Catholics, we're able to say, well, the idea that the universe is very old, the idea that the earth is very old, it does not conflict with anything that we believe. And so we have a certain freedom in interpreting this passage And if science says that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, that's fine. It's not. I am. It's possible that that's what the Bible means. That the day of Genesis is actually a very long period of time. This is something that was clarified under the pontificate of St. Pius X. The Pontifical Biblical Commission clarified that it's perfectly acceptable for Catholics to interpret the word day, or yom in Hebrew, as meaning a long period of time. We have that freedom, but Protestants often don't have that freedom.
Thank you. I want to ask you something that came to my mind when you were talking about this huge debate, that I think is much stronger in your country than, for example, in Italy. I mean, in Italy, unfortunately, I have to say, we don't talk so much about these things. We should probably, but it's very strong in your country. And I always thought that this was caused by the fact that, of course, you are a country where there is a very strong Protestant presence. So do you think that this indeed is the fact that there is this big debate indeed is a good thing? Because I mean, these are very important issues, and debating these issues also help to clarify our mind. What do you think? Because you are an American, so of course you are an insider in that kind of culture.
Yes, you're absolutely right that the debate between religion and science is much more passionate here because we have so many what are called fundamentalist Protestants. And when I looked at the Catholic reaction to all the scientific discoveries of the 19th and 20th century, what I found in very traditional writers, such as the writers under the pontificate of Pius X, or the seminary manuals on the Bible, I found the Catholic Church to be very, very reasonable. And when I tried to discover where did this conflict come from, where did this idea come from that the Bible has to teach that God created the universe in 6 24-hour days, where did it come from? And I discovered it came from the Protestants. So when the Protestants were trying to face these new scientific discoveries, especially geology, there is a British scientist by the name of Charles Lyell, and he came up with a principle called Uniformitarianism. And so Uniformitarianism is the idea that the processes that we see operating on the earth right now are the same processes that have always operated, that the geological processes, the laws of the universe that we see now, the laws for the earth, the laws for rocks, the laws for the movement of tectonic plates, and all those things that we see right now, we can apply those laws back in time because they've always been there and they've never changed. And the thing is, if we apply those laws back in time and we look at the physical features of the earth, then we have to say that it took a very long time for these physical features to form. And let me just say that this assumption by Charles Lyell is perfectly in line with the God that we worship. The God that we worship as Catholics, we believe that he is reasonable. He is not willful. He doesn't just do things for the heck of it, but whenever he does things with wisdom. There is order in what he does. And an ordered God, a reasonable God, a wise God would make for the universe to always operate on the same laws. He wouldn't come along after a certain period of time and change the laws and say, oh, well, the laws that I put here, they're not so good. Let's change the laws to something else. So this assumption of uniformitarianism demanded that the earth be very old. And the Protestants, because of the fact that they, especially in the United States, they would want to take a very literal understanding of the Bible. They reacted by saying, oh, these scientists are attacking the Bible. These scientists are bad. They're against faith. And So we have to defend the Bible. There's no way that the earth can be older than 6,000 years. And so we have to defend the Bible, and we're going to say that no matter what science discovers, we have to believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. This principle of uniformitarianism is false. We must reject it. And so they are in a position to where they have to explain away what science has revealed. And it effectively leads them to a position where they attack science. They have to be always on the attack of the data that scientists have discovered in the modern world. Whereas for me as a Catholic, I'm just like, doesn't matter. Whatever science has found, even if they've discovered the universe is old, that the earth is old, it doesn't conflict with what I have to believe as a Catholic. I have the flexibility to believe, yes, that the universe is much older than 6,000 years.
Father, I want to show you a comment from one of our listeners that say, Brennus say, 7-day creation does not come from Protestantism. It was basic Catholic belief for centuries before the Protestants even existed. So how you react to this?
So I would point out, as I mentioned, that the fathers had different interpretations of Genesis 1. I would say to your viewer as well that what doctrine does an old universe contradict? The only thing it contradicts is a very literal reading of Genesis 1. But there's no definition of the church saying that we have to believe this extreme literal reading. And I can provide for you a literal reading, a historical reading, a historical interpretation of Genesis 1 that is very satisfactory, where we just simply understand day as a long period of time, as held by many of the pre-Vatican II seminary manuals. So this is perfectly orthodox. How can it be possible that all of these great Catholic teachers, before, after evolution and so on, they were willing to admit that the earth was extremely old, the universe was very old, and yet they were not condemned by Pius X. I mean, Pius X was one of the strongest popes possible against modernism, but he saw no problem with believing in an old universe and an old earth. And as I say, this is different from Darwinian evolution, but yeah, you can't say that this is against the fathers. You can't say that this is against any of the teachings of the faith.
But Father, listen, you mentioned now Pius X. Of course, Pius X, you say one of the strongest. I think by far is surely the strongest opponent to modernism. We think about all the documents starting from 1907 Pascendi, and then before that Lamentabili from the the Sant'Uffizio, and other documents and speeches that he gave against the modernism, and all the work he did to try to control modernism, because then he was very fully aware that he was not able to defeat modernism, because it is a very complex phenomenon, modernism. But I want to ask you about something. In that period of modernism, one of the main reasons to be condemned regarding biblical studies was to doubt about the authorship of the Pentateuch. So if you say that was not Moses that was the author of the Pentateuch, so that can make you in very big troubles. So what do you think about this today? Do you share the same kind of condemnation if someone say, oh, is not Moses the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, or you are more flexible?
So during the pontificate of St. Pius X, the Pontifical Biblical Commission came out with a series of statements or clarifications about the Catholic position on Genesis. I've mentioned one of those decisions, about the meaning, the possible meaning of the word yom or day. And there was also something on this question of the Pentateuch, who is the author of the Pentateuch? And at that time, these things were phrased as questions. It was like, is it possible for Catholics to believe that someone other than Moses was the author of the first 5 books of the Bible? Or should we believe blah, 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 blah? And there's just a short answer. Yes to the first, no to the second, something like that. So what they said about Moses was that Catholics should still believe that Moses was the author of the 5 books, but that he could have fully made use of sources in writing it, or he could have passed on his documents, like he did research and had some documents, passed them on to someone else to write it. The Pentateuch ultimately came from Moses. It's kind of like the same with St. Paul in the book, the Epistle to the Hebrews. So did St. Paul write the Epistle to the Hebrews? Well, it seems like the thought of St. Paul, but not the writing style of St. Paul. So maybe St. Paul used a secretary. Maybe that's what happened. So that was the decision of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. And that's, I think, what the position I would hold is that Moses was at the source of the Pentateuch, but he may not have written every single word. He may have used a secretary, or he may have used sources. Obviously, the book of Deuteronomy talks about the death of Moses. So Moses could not have written about his own death. There's no way. But let me just mention one last thing, Aurelio, about these decisions of the Pontifical Biblical Commission, just to show how this is perfectly orthodox for Catholics to believe in long periods of time. The person that St. Pius X chose to be the secretary for the Pontifical Biblical Commission was Father Fulcran Vigouroux, a French priest. And before he was chosen by St. Pius X, he wrote a biblical manual for seminaries. And in these biblical manuals, he clearly stated the evidence for an ancient earth, a very old earth. And he supported an interpretation of Genesis 1 as teaching that the earth developed and the universe developed over long periods of time. And he was the one that the most anti-modernist pope chose to be the secretary of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. So it's clear that this opinion is perfectly acceptable for Catholics.
Father, I want to conclude this very interesting conversation with one question that is inspired by the title of our conversation. So, according to your opinion, what are the biggest challenges that science pose to faith? So, what are the things we should confront on the science questions about faith? What is for you the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge that we have, Aurelio, is that the scientists control the narrative. The scientists control what is being taught to young people in the universities. The scientists have the ability to bring across not only scientific data, but also a worldview that is anti-God. If we just took the scientific data as such, that scientific data points to God very clearly. But what they do is they take the scientific data and they impose upon it a materialistic worldview. And if young people are not instructed, if they don't understand the things that we've been talking about, if they come from a fundamentalist Protestant background and they get this very knowledgeable teacher talking to them about Darwinian evolution or talking to them about the ancient universe, then they will not know what to say. And it will seem like they should question their faith. So I think it's really important for Catholics to have this balance on religion and science. That's why I wrote this book. I mean, in my circles, I have very, very conservative, very traditionalist Catholics, and I'm trying to help them be more balanced in the sense of accepting the scientific data and seeing how the scientific data is the most powerful weapon we can use against the scientists. I love to meet scientists on the airplane or whatever, and I'll just start talking to them about the Big Bang. It's like, how can you believe that this came from nothing? The like spontaneous creation, and it's totally irrational. So I think the main problem we have today is that they control the narrative. They control the information that's being given to people, and people are just not having access to the real interpretation of the scientific data, and that is that it points to God very, very clearly.
Thank you, Father. So I want to remind our viewers and of course all the people that will see this after is broadcast live now that Father Robinson is the author of a book. Maybe you can show your book that he was there. Yes, a realist guide to faith and science. Who has published the book?
Grace Wing.
Grace Wing. Okay, and
Yes.
it's of course available on Amazon. It's also available in ebook or only in paperback.
It's available in paperback and hardback. Unfortunately, there is no ebook version of the book.
That's really unfortunate because
Yes.
lots of people, me included, read a lot ebooks, and but in any case, I think you can buy the paperback or the hardback versions, and you
Yes.
can confront yourself with the ideas of the scientist and priest Father Robinson on this very important topic. So
Yes.
thank you very much, Father Robinson, for your participation. I really appreciate. I think it was very interesting, and I hope that also our viewers find it very interesting.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and bye bye.